forget you can just edit them out. You know, it's not broadcasted live.
We're here to speak out against racism, as we are every month here in Newcastle City Centre, because it is so important while the government is bringing in all these attacks on the working class, when they're trying to divide people, that we stand here united and that we be a constant presence on the streets of Britain. So this is an open mic for all anti-racists, so if anyone wants to use this microphone to speak out against racism, then come along and let one of the stewards in the yellow jackets know, and they'll let you. Now we're here to speak out against racism in Britain, because what we hear on the media is the government talking. We hear government spokespeople talking about how terrible the situation is in the Middle East, how terrible it is in Africa, how terrible it is around the world, with different groups of people fighting against each other, with how Britain is one of the only true democracies in the world, about how Britain is a multicultural society and we need to go spread democracy around the world to these Sunnis and these Shiites who are having their racist warfares, to all these people who can't get along. Well, racism is much more than this, and racism is happening right here in Britain today. Racism is not just what it's portrayed as people calling each other names on the streets. Racism is a fundamental part of British government policy. Racism in Britain is used to divide the working class. I'd like to give a few examples of the racism that black people in Britain face today. Now, when talking about racism, we need to start by looking at what Britain's doing internationally, because Britain is an imperialist country. The way Britain has become so wealthy is by plundering resources from around the world, by exploiting people's labour around the world. Britain has got wealthy off the backs of Africa, of the Middle East, by forcing people to work in sweatshops, by waging wars for global domination, to defend the oil, to defend the natural resources which they can then plunder. So as part of this, they need to oppress nations around the world. And this national oppression is then reflected back within Britain in racism. And that racism is often faced by asylum seekers and migrants who are fleeing from these situations created around the world by British imperialism. It is faced by black people born in Britain as well, because it is part of the government's interest to divide the working class, because they don't want people fighting back on an anti-racist, internationalist basis. They want to keep us divided so that they can continue to attack us. And the ways they do this come in many different forms. The first is their immigration controls and their attacks on migrants and asylum seekers, their use of immigration prisons and administrative detention to lock up people fleeing from countries like Afghanistan, like Iraq, like Congo, people fleeing from countries that have been devastated as a result of British imperialism. These people get locked up in immigration prisons. There is no limit to the amount of time people can be held in these immigration prisons. Little children are locked up in these immigration prisons. And when people speak out against this in these immigration prisons, they get beaten, they get deported. Alongside this, the Labour government in its last 13-year term brought in many more policies aimed at forcing asylum seekers into destitution, to force them to flee the country. These include the taking away of the right to work for asylum seekers, forcing people to live on benefits of little more than £35 a week. This includes forcing people out onto the streets and not providing housing. This includes bringing in a voucher system whereby people aren't even given the pittance that they're given in benefits, in money, they're given it in vouchers, which means that they often can't get the food that they need for them and their families. All these policies are aimed at forcing people into destitution. These policies have caused untold suffering, they have caused untold deaths. And it is our Labour government which has that blood on its hand And these policies are being continued today. Now we have a new Tory and Lib Dem government in. Another way that racism is used in Britain is through the state's recent attacks on Muslim people. And this can be understood in the context of what I said earlier about Britain's international exploitation. Because as Britain is waging its wars in the Middle East, while it is occupying Iraq and Afghanistan and supporting Israel's brutal assault on the Palestinian people, its ongoing genocide, they're attacking Muslim people in Britain because Muslim people are the ones most likely to stand up in support of the national liberation struggles going on in Muslim countries around the world. These attacks come in the form of immigration controls again, in the form of anti-terror laws, the stop and search, which is used as a vehicle for racist harassment of black people. The Labour government brought in stop and search laws under the guise of anti-terrorism. However, in the last year, over 200,000 people were stopped under these stop and search laws.